Hey, so it seemed like we might get out of 2018 without any more controversy surrounding Kanye, but 2018's been a bastard and it won't let that happen as it seems there's another storm brewing. And okay. This is a weird one. You can see from the headlines, Consequence of Sound has Kanye West's XXXtentacion collaboration leaks features questionable sexual assault lyrics. You have this one, Kanye West verse on XXXTentacion's new album is something. You have hot new hip hop. Kanye defends X on leaked collaboration. Kanye West defends X. This was always going to be a controversial thing, as X has been a highly controversial artist. I think it was a year ago, maybe, a story broke from his ex-girlfriend, Geneva Ayala, saying that X was very, very, very abusive when they were together, and the details of that time were harrowing. A lot of people came away from that very grossed out by X and outraged. And X has a very passionate fan base and a fan base that was growing in the time that he was alive and has continued to grow after his murder. And there's been debate as a lot of his fans have claimed that Geneva's account was exaggerated. Was it the truth? They found ways to, or information that they think absolves him or makes him at least more innocent than what she had claimed. And part of the drama comes from the fact that after his murder, there was a recorded conversation that came out about his ex-girlfriend, that he started fucking her up and bashed her face. The Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office told Pitchfork last month that both X's prosecuting and defense attorneys considered the tape to be a confession. And you can imagine that one side of the group was like, that seals it. He did all of those things. He's an awful person. Where a lot of his fans still listened to the audio and found evidence that to them showed again that this wasn't as it seemed, that he was being falsely accused, falsely found guilty in the public eye, which is why this Genius annotation about now your name is tainted by the claims they patent, the defendant is guilty, no one blames the plaintiff, immediately goes to Geneva, even though there's no mention of her here. That's the context that people first go to, which is why I think Tostin says, given X's history, the choice of subject matter certainly seems deliberate. Either way, it's also just plain gross. So I think that editorialization is very dramatic, which, Jesus, so much of the media these days is just so dramatic in how they lay things out. Either way, it's just plain gross. So we could be genuinely talking about how false accusations can ruin people, which is a thing that has happened. Just like there are accusations made against somebody that are impossible to prove but are very true, and people are canceled or at least brought to task publicly in a way that, I don't know, I think is appropriate sometimes. Like the Kevin Spacey shit, I think was pretty appropriate, but that doesn't mean every case is appropriate. And I think Kanye taking the stance that it can ruin people's lives in the verse, in and of itself isn't plain gross. The issue that's coming up is how people are interpreting the lines, and we just saw a major thing happen this very week with Meek Mill's What's Free song. Jay-Z had two lines in a verse that talked about how you can't Prince and Michael Jay and Kanye because they have Prince and Michael's DNA, which some people took as a very clear sign that the media isn't going to be allowed to divide Kanye and Jay-Z the way that they continuously did with Michael and Prince, and that this was a sign of solidarity, or a show of solidarity with Kanye, where other people took that as meaning Jay was dissing Kanye, because Jay starts the line with no red hat. So people took that as like, oh, Jay didn't have a red hat, Kanye did, so that's why you can't put them together like you could Prince and Michael as both legends. Like, Kanye's not the legend that Jay-Z is, because Kanye had the red hat. And that argument, I think, was valid given the writing of the line. At least you could make the argument, right? But there were so many headlines saying, like, Jay-Z took Kanye to task. Jay-Z attacks Kanye. Jay-Z disses Kanye, without mentioning the other interpretation of the line that could view it as far less divisive, not a diss at all, but brotherhood. And it got Jay-Z to tweet for the first time in over a year, saying the line clearly meant, "You can't divide me from my brothers," which made all of these outlets have to go back and be like, oh, turns out Jay didn't attack Kanye. Whoops, what crazy people thought that? You assholes. So the same week that that just happened, we have the same group of assholes now looking at other lines and drawing very sensational headlines. Questionable sexual assault lyrics. Like, that's an insane headline for something that might not be that. And it comes from these lines here, and we'll jump to those lines specifically. She want to give you the cookie, you famous Amos. She gave you the pussy, but you ain't pay for the anus. So cookie is slang for vagina, and famous Amos is a cookie brand, right? Which is Kanye being clever with the line. It's essentially saying, you're famous, and this woman wants to have sex with you because you're famous. She gave you the pussy, but you ain't pay for the anus. And there's two ways to read that. That you had consensual vaginal sex and did not have anal sex because you didn't pay for it, it wasn't part of the deal. Or that you had consensual vaginal sex followed by non-consensual anal sex, which in that case would be sexual assault. And that Kanye, people are viewing this line as being consequential. That from this action of the sexual encounter, you go to, now your name is tainted by the claims they paint. So after having sex with this person, they're making claims and it's ruining your reputation, and that you're guilty no matter what. Nobody looks at the plaintiff, blames the plaintiff. That's never talked about. Which could be false accusations. It could be just lying about what happened. Nobody questions the story about who's making the accusations. So then Kanye, kind of as a narrator, says, gotta say it in layman's terms. So he's talking about this in layman's terms while this person being accused is waiting on their arraignment. Because if the jury say you did it, the payment is heinous, which is really getting at the cancel culture of the day. Cancel culture has been something that Kanye has been railing about. Not necessarily railing about, but concerned about, especially when cancel culture can come from false accusations or from a misinterpretation of what somebody said. People just automatically jump on and take the non-truth as truth, or the misrepresentation of what was said as accurate, and the payment for that is heinous. And then he says, give me 1 minute, which I think this is him transitioning from the narrator role to being an active participant. As he's talking about these accusations that get leveled at people, his lady faints and his babies are crying because now he's one of the accused. He's going to be a victim of this, is essentially what he's saying, just as so many others have been. Or, you know, he was in 2018, as people continuously misinterpreted, misrepresented, failed to provide context for the things that Kanye was saying, and none of them were really held accountable for that. Not to say that everything that Kanye said in 2018 was the best that it could have been said or the smartest thing, but a lot of what he was accused of saying wasn't what he meant. Just look at the Trump Association. He said that he loved Trump, but he also said he loved his cousin who committed murder, and still doesn't support the cousin that committed murder, right? Like, he can be upset with his cousin, but still have that love for this person. It doesn't mean that he agrees with everything that his cousin did or isn't upset with his cousin. The same way that when he said he loved Trump, it didn't mean that he supported all of Trump's politics or policies or anything like that. But people really took it to that level, that Kanye had to be for building the wall, had to be for the Muslim ban, had to be for this and that. No. So you could see how this would be applicable to Kanye's own 2018, and maybe not necessarily in defense of X or even about sexual claims. But give me 1 minute. My lady just fainted. My baby's is crying. You understand what I'm saying. And what he's saying here is that it's not just the reputation that gets ruined. It's not just a career that can be canceled. It affects a family. It affects a wife's perception of her husband. It affects a baby's perception of their father. There's more at stake here, and more that gets harmed than just somebody's reputation. Their whole family can be victimized by somebody making false accusations. With all that said, I don't know if reading this line as consequential, that now your name is tainted by this, is what Kanye was saying. If you look at the verse, he starts with so much hate at the top, it's a lonely place. When you find out the ops ain't the only snakes, and your spouse only know what you don't erase, the world only know you by your worst mistakes. The world only know you by your worst mistakes kind of gets into what he's talking about here, the claims they painting about you. But he goes into, so spaz on they ass, that's the only way. And most of this is just spazzing, right? Showing like why you're the best, not like taking things laying down. It's being very like ego driven and Yeezusian, and he's bringing that energy. And it kind of concludes with, all the pain and anguish turn me into a man, so I ain't complaining. Now these things is changing. And he lists things that are changing. No more lames is hanging, so you don't have lame people around you anymore. No more fame and famous. You don't get to enjoy the fame part of being famous, right? You really only get this, the hate that's at the top. The snakes, the dynamic with your wife that may not be the best, the world only knowing you by your worst mistakes. That's why there's no fame and famous anymore. That's something that Kanye ends up talking about on 808s and Heartbreak, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Yeezus, Life of Pablo, Yay, that fame actually kind of sucks. And ain't no shame in shaming. I think that line gets at the idea that, not that there's no shame in shaming, like shame away, rather the opposite, that people who are shaming no longer have any shame in how they shame, right? So they will say the most absurd and hurtful and awful things about somebody because they feel justified in their shaming of somebody else, which is something that you can see in how the media has talked about Kanye in 2018, how people, I don't know if you've ever been on social media, I'm sure that you have, but you can see on social media how awful people can be to one another. If you look at the comments on Pete Davidson's Instagram, he had a very amicable breakup with Ariana Grande, where they're both being nice to one another. Grande's manager has talked about how good of a dude Pete was and how he doesn't deserve the hate. And every post he makes, you just have all these fans being like, fuck you, you deserve to die, like, go kill yourself. Ariana won, she's better off without you. Just no shame in how they're attacking this man and the shit that they're saying because they feel justified in attacking him. Even look here. Either way, it's also just plain gross. Like, he's just characterizing what Kanye said in this verse as plain gross without any assessment really of what is being said, or maybe even a misunderstanding of what's being said, and he feels no shame in shaming Kanye in that way. So I'm pretty sure that's what the no shame in shaming means, but this is part of the things that are changing, that you have lames that are no longer hanging, fame, no shame in shaming, that you have women that are trying to have sex with you, and that you also have your name getting tainted. That's part of the things that are changing, which even has that parallel construction of now these things is changing. Now your name is tainted. It's another in the sequence of events. So instead of viewing this as leading to this, it could just be that this is part of a list. This is one thing that's changed. This is a second thing that's changed. This is a third thing that's changed. This is a fourth thing that's changed. I'm counting and you can't see my hand. Being left-handed sucks right now. And plus I have to use the mouse to demonstrate. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the fifth thing that's changed. And that means that now your name is tainted would have nothing to do with this sexual encounter, which would mean that the line has no sexual assault meaning at all. And I'm not saying that's 100% the case. You can make an argument that this is very much consequential, that you have this sexual encounter followed by the now, which would seem to imply this, then that, right? I had sex and now this is the result of the action. But given that we have a list of things going on right above it, there's an equally valid argument to be made that these two things have nothing to do with one another and are both just things that happen because you're at the top and you're dealing with a lot of bullshit when you're at the top and you're liable for any of this shit to happen. So I would just make that and just say that anybody making the claim that this is Kanye defending X or that this is Kanye with questionable sexual assault lyrics at this point in time is reading the line in a very one-dimensional way and maybe not looking at the construction of it in a broader way. The same thing that happened with the Jay-Z lines where people took a one-dimensional reading of it and thought that it was Jay dissing Kanye when it wasn't really that at all. Though it could very much be that this is exactly what Kanye meant and he was referring to Geneva and he was talking about the Me Too movement and sexual assault and all of that. I'm not saying that that's not a possibility at all. I'm just saying it's also a possibility that that's not what was intended at all and that Kanye is just talking about how people will make claims about you in the public realm and you will be found guilty of those claims without any recourse of self-defense. I talked about the Donald Trump thing. Also with the 400 years of slavery sounds like a choice. If you look up here, this is a perfect example of it. The world only know you by your worst mistakes. The genius annotation is, in 2018 alone, Kanye has caused a lot of controversy, ranging from a statement that slavery was a choice. Except, do you remember, well, of course it goes right to that. Kanye never said that slavery was a choice. He said slavery, 400 years of slavery, like slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice, which is different context completely than slavery was a choice. I'm not saying that it's not controversial, right? That it's not a problematic statement to make, but just it's inherently different than slavery was a choice. And anybody that's saying Kanye said slavery was a choice is misinterpreting the facts, and they're not being held accountable for that. And you can find dozens and dozens of outlets that frame it in a way that he didn't say it, and nobody's calling them out for it. And I don't know, there's a much different meaning to slavery was a choice than 400 years of slavery sounds like a choice, where 400 years is from 1700s or 1600s to now and accounts for the physical slavery up to the mental slavery that Kanye has talked about. It's a far different conversation than just saying the slaves back in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, they made a choice to be slaves. That's a fundamentally different conversation and argument to be had, and one that Kanye didn't make. I'm getting off onto that. You know what I mean at this point. So I think it's just as likely that Kanye could be talking about that as specifically trying to defend X or trying to critique the Me Too movements or in some way. That Kanye's way more concerned about this dramatic cancel culture that you can say anything about anybody and have that be something that leads to somebody being canceled and having this heinous payment that they have to make that they're innocent of, and that real families are suffering from that. Though I think you could argue, and then I'll end this video, that there are people that are being accused, just like Kevin Spacey, just like Louis C.K., and the accusations are very valid, and the results of those accusations are very valid. I'm not saying that there's no public, I guess, trial and guilty verdict and payment enacted, that those things aren't sometimes necessary, right? But that it's also a dangerous thing because it's something that's not controlled and has no standards and can be applied to people that are innocent, and people do get hurt from it. And I don't think Kanye's wrong for talking about that perspective, though it's a controversial thing to talk about. So of course Kanye is talking about it. So I think that says everything that I want to say about that. If you enjoyed the video, I hate saying like or subscribe, but if you want to support the channel, the easiest and best way to do that is to like or subscribe. Both would be nice, but it tells YouTube that this is content that people like, and it helps us get more visibility, which, you know, helps with some money, which is also very nice. So I would appreciate that. If you have any questions, any thoughts, go ahead and leave them below and I'll get to them. And I hope you're having a great day when you watch this. Talk soon.